Okay, so this is the second webinar in our three-part webinar, and this webinar is all about planning and creating asynchronous materials, and we're going to discuss what asynchronous means and how we can implement it in the best way in our fall courses. So here's an agenda. So first, we're going to go through some basic principles and the way that synchronous and asynchronous differentiate from each other, and we'll also talk about designing asynchronous materials, how to share those effectively on your classes, and how to design async materials for assessing students as well. We're going to end with a question and answer session, but in the meantime, like I said before, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Okay, so as our welcome, I'm going to launch this poll. So I'm clicking launch polling, and you should see a poll on your screen. It's 2 questions. Okay, so all 8 of you responded, and there's a mix of departments with 50% of you in the other category. And what are you looking forward to most this summer? Sunshine, half of us said, and the rest are evenly split. I'm surprised that someone wants the summer to be over so fall semester can start, but really appreciate your enthusiasm. and the others voted for rest and relaxation and wine o'clock. So that's good. I'm going to share the results so you can see. Can you all see the results? Okay, great. I'm just curious, the 4 people who labeled themselves as other, can you just quickly unmute yourself and explain what department you come from, so we kind of have a feeling for who you are? Sean, you're one of them?
Yes, my name is Sean Hill. I work for the IT department, and specifically my role at the institution is to help you as faculty members use innovative digital technology in the classroom.
Thanks, Sean.
And I'm one of them, Rachel.
Who we've introduced before as the Director of Online Learning here at GSC, absolutely. And there should be 2 more people, I think.
I'm another other. I'm Kirsten. I'm in the library, and I'm here to help you find library resources for your asynchronous content.
Thanks, Kirsten. And then Angelica chatted to everyone that she's in the Graduate School of Education, but she's an adjunct in the counseling department. Okay, well, welcome, Angelica. That's great. All right, wonderful. So let's get started. Okay, so the purpose of this webinar is really to challenge you to rethink synchronous work by reimagining the possibilities of what students can do at their own pace in an asynchronous setting. So this webinar is going to be especially helpful for instructors who need to transition all-day courses or institutes to online learning, or even just your traditional 15-week or 7-week courses. We want you to think about how you can turn that regular 2-hour-a-week session or 3-hour-a-week session into something that's really engaging for students. So a lot of that is going to be rethinking lectures especially, and we'll talk about that later too. Okay, so the main goal of this webinar is to really provide you with a diverse toolkit of asynchronous activities that you can use to deliver academic content, assess student understanding, provide options and choices for students to learn, and offload the weight of content from your synchronous sessions. So the more flexibility, the more choices students have, the more engaged and motivated they're going to be in your classes. So this webinar is really about providing you a diverse toolkit of things that you can do to make your courses really engaging for students. So we're just going to quickly go through some of the specific objectives. So by the end of the webinar, you should be able to plan purposeful asynchronous material that both complements and furthers what you do in your live sessions. You should also be able to decide how to allocate instruction appropriately between asynchronous and synchronous work. So think about what works better in a live session versus what works better when the students can do this on their own time. Okay. By the end of the webinar, you should also be able to design asynchronous material that meaningfully delivers academic content through video lectures, screen capture presentations, and what we like to call responsive video watching. And we're going to go through each of those later on in the webinar. And you should also have an understanding of how you can share these asynchronous materials effectively through Blackboard. And you should also be able to, at the end of this webinar, think about creating asynchronous assessments that accurately measure students' comprehension of the content that you want them to have an understanding of by the time this course is over. So some things we're going to go over are tools for quizzes and tests, text-based responses, discussion boards, etc. So you're really going to have a feel of the types of evaluations that are available to you for assessing student understanding, but also delivering academic content in a creative way. Okay. Here are some contacts that you should feel free to use for any of your questions. And don't worry about writing this down, because we're going to, in our newsletters, send out the support contacts, and they're also available on our GSE online website. So if you have any instructional design or pedagogical questions or concerns, you can email any one of us from the GSE online team. So you've already met Rachel and myself. Lynn Hooley is our online program manager. She's on vacation this week, good for her. So, but you can also email her as well. And if you just have general inquiries and you don't know which of us specifically to contact, you can use our main email, gsconline@fordham.edu. Here are support contacts for technical concerns specifically. So there's a lot of support contacts for Blackboard. There's a Tech Help tab, and also the Faculty Technology Center. And Lindsay Karp, who's also on vacation this week, is our interim GSE liaison. So her email is also on our GSE course continuity website. Perusal is a social annotation tool that we're going to talk about later in this webinar. And the expert in that tool is Sean, who you've met a few minutes ago. So you can also email him about Perusal or VoiceThread or any of the things that he's introducing to you today. If you have concerns with Zoom specifically, you should also contact Fordham IT or the Zoom support hotline. They have a lot of video tutorials that might actually answer your question before you contact a live person. Okay? All right, so let's get started with talking about some basic principles of asynchronous work. So first of all, what is asynchronous work? So asynchronous learning occurs outside a real-time classroom environment. So students are working and learning at their own pace and on their own schedule. So basically, synchronous learning is a live session. So exactly what we're doing here through Zoom. Anything you do outside of a live session when you're talking to people in real time is asynchronous work, okay? Asynchronous work requires the instructor to plan ahead and really communicate expectations clearly for students. The more clarification that you can give to students, the less likelihood there's going to be that students are emailing you with a lot of redundant questions. How long is the assignment? How many pages? What format do you want it in? If you clearly lay that all out, then you shouldn't have any kinds of redundant emails in your inbox. Another note that we want to point out is that students are really going to be expecting high quality courses for the fall. They were understanding about the spring semester because that transition was very rapid and very sudden. They were also understanding about the summer semester because there wasn't a lot of leeway time and play time to really get that set up. But now students are realizing that professors have an entire summer, so that's about 8 weeks or more, to plan for the fall semester. And even though that's really not enough time for a fully fledged, proper, high quality online course, they're still expecting a lot more out of their courses than they had in the spring and fall. So we just wanted you to keep in mind that student expectations are going to be a lot higher for the fall semester. And we don't want you to feel overwhelmed by that, but just so it kind of lights the fire under you so that you can take the time throughout the summer, even though it's not the summer that you planned for, but you really have to strategize as you go along. Okay. So for us, there's really two main purposes of asynchronous work. So the first purpose is to deliver content. So typically in a face-to-face or live session class, this is done through lecture in a live session and readings done at home and discussion about those readings. Asynchronous work, though, can be a lot more diverse. So you don't have to deliver content just through lectures, even though you can do that through lectures. And we highly encourage that you record your lectures so that that's viewed asynchronously. And then when you come to the live session, you can have in-depth conversations about the content that the students had just previously watched. So another purpose of asynchronous work is to assess student learning. So typically in a face-to-face class, you do this if all the students come into a live session classroom and they either hand in papers written at home or take a test or quiz right there in front of you. With asynchronous work, though, you can really be a lot more creative in how you assess what a student comprehends about your content. And we're going to go through examples of that later on in this webinar. There's a lot of advantages of really amping up and thinking deeply about the asynchronous work that you want to assign to your students. So first of all, asynchronous work can be accessed from anywhere. Your student doesn't have to be, in a live classroom or on campus. You can provide students with a lot of choice and creativity. And actually, the more options and the more choices students have, the more engaged and motivated they feel for your class because they're choosing what they want to do for a specific assignment. They can also self-pace and provide themselves with flexibility to set their own schedule in how they want to accomplish these asynchronous assignments. You're also giving them more time to independently reflect upon something and meaningfully respond. So when you're in a live session discussion, responses tend to be pretty quick and you have to think on your feet, which is also a really useful skill. But in an asynchronous situation, if you have a discussion board, then students can really think meaningfully and purposefully about what they want to say and how they want to say it. So it gives them more time to reflect, which is one of the Jesuit values, by the way, of Fordham, reflection. So that's something to keep in mind. With asynchronous work, you can also create a warehouse of class content and materials on your class site that you can reuse and recycle for all of your courses moving forward. So the more time that you spend in creating asynchronous material now, it's a long-term investment. The less time you'll have to recreate things from scratch in the future. You also save time in your live session classrooms by doing a lot of the legwork outside of the live session. So it's like a flipped classroom model. Instead of lecturing in a live session, you can record your lectures, have students view those lectures at home, and then have more in-depth discussions or even student-led discussions in your live sessions. So you actually don't have to do that kind of basic legwork in your live session, but you can have students do that on their own time. So asynchronous work is really most successful when, like I said before, communication is clear. You really have to be precise and exact and clear about your expectations for students. And that covers a lot of ground. So you have to be clear in deadlines, when things are due, the format of the assignment, the length of the assignment, any expectations that you have. If you have a rubric for the assignment, you should include that in the assignment instructions. The more information that students have about the assignment, the more capable they feel in doing it, the more understanding they have about what you expect as an instructor. And like I said before, the less time you're going to spend answering redundant emails from students about clarifying your instructions. You should also give appropriate time estimates for each assignment. Now, we understand that every student processes things and completes assignments at their own pace. Some students do it a lot quicker than others, but if you give a time range for asynchronous material, then that really helps students with setting their own schedules and being able to strategize when they can accomplish the assignments that you give them. So for instance, if there's a video that they have to watch, you can give the exact time that that video lasts. If there's a reading of a chapter, you can give a time range, like this chapter should take you 30 to 60 minutes or 45 to 60 minutes, something like that. So just use your professional judgment and your knowledge of the students in making those time range estimates. Asynchronous work is also really successful when grading is consistent. So the more explicit and the more transparent you can be about how you grade the assignments, the more, like I said, likely the students are going to give it their all and be more effortful in the assignment. So whenever you have a rubric, provide that and provide a clear explanation of how that asynchronous work is going to be graded and how that's going to be factored into the overall grade for the course. And this overall grading percentage should be included in the syllabus so that students can see on the syllabus what each assignment is worth. The asynchronous work is also successful when it aligns with your overall learning goals. So really think about what you want students to come away with at the end of your course, what your overall goal is, and does that assignment that you're giving them actually lead into or scaffold into that overall learning goal. Students don't want to feel like they're just doing the busy work, like just a worksheet to have time, complete or a check mark in their grade book. Students really want to feel like the work that they do at home is furthering their education, furthering their comprehension of the content, and is also leading into a deeper understanding and reaching that goal that you set out for the course. Okay. All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about the differences between synchronous and asynchronous learning and how you can decide whether an activity is better suited for the live session or for at-home work. So synchronous learning, again, occurs when class meets in real time, just like this, in a Zoom session or live on the ground face-to-face. And usually, synchronous sessions are teacher-led, but you can have activities that are more student-led in your live sessions as well. And we're going to talk more about live sessions in tomorrow's webinar. So if you're interested in attending tomorrow, then that's the topic that we're going to be covering. Asynchronous learning, like I said before, occurs when students complete work outside of the class at their own pace, and that's usually guided and graded by a teacher. Okay, so when you're considering whether your activity should be done in live session or done asynchronously, here are some questions that you should think about. So you should choose synchronous work if you answer yes to the following questions. Are you, as the instructor, essential to explaining the topic or having students understand the topic? If you need to explain a concept that can't be explained in the pre-recorded lecture, then do that in live session. But if what you're explaining can easily be understood in a lecture that is viewed outside of the live session, then that's what we encourage you to do, because students, they really don't respond well to live session long lectures. There was even a survey that went out from the dean's office asking students for their opinions about the online courses that they've taken in the spring semester at GSE, and overall students were really discouraged by live session lectures. So they're much more interested in having discussions and other activities then. Does the topic require live conversations to build understanding? If the answer is yes, then that should be done in a live session. If the student can learn the topic on his or her own with minimal guidance from the teacher, then that could be done asynchronously. If the content can be delivered through pure lecture, then again, that can be done asynchronously. And if the topic is better learned at a student's own pace, where the student can pause, practice, go back to the topic, then that's also better done asynchronously. Okay, so in summary, synchronous work should really be considered teacher and or sometimes student-directed work done simultaneously in real time in a live session. And asynchronous work should really be considered mainly student-directed in that the student completes the work at his or her own time with minimal teacher guidance. You're not there holding the student's hand as the student does this work on his or her own time. Okay, in our last webinar, we talked a little bit about study hours, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but just so you know, we want to encourage you to think about overall study time as based on the standard Carnegie unit and the New York State Department of Education policies, which we follow for our online classes. So 1 credit equals 45 hours of study time. So for a 3-credit course, a minimum of 135 hours should be allocated throughout the semester to meet the requirements. So you should think about 9 hours of study time or sitting time per week for a 15-hour course. Okay, so that would include readings, writing assignments, viewing lectures, etc. Okay. So here we're going to be talking about designing asynchronous materials for delivering your course content. All right, let's talk about video lecture. So instead of doing lecture through a live session on Zoom, you can easily record that lecture and you can use that lecture continuously for your courses moving forward. So some easy ways to record your lecture are actually using Zoom or even QuickTime. But Zoom is really easy because all of you, through your Fordham accounts, have a Zoom account. So you can open a meeting just by yourself, do a screen share like I'm doing right now, and hit the record button and walk through your lecture. And in that way, you're recording the lecture. So Zoom transcribes the video, but you can also upload it to YouTube, and YouTube will add closed captioning on your video, so that will meet standards of accessibility. And then you can upload that link into Blackboard. So some advantages of video lecture as opposed to lecture in live sessions are that students can pause when they need to and take notes. They can also rewatch the lecture as many times as they want, and they could even listen to the lecture as they're exercising or walking around the neighborhood. And like I said before, you save time in live session because that's when you can answer more in-depth questions about the content, and students will watch the content on their own time. Okay, so at this time, Sean is going to take over for a little bit and talk about uploading and embedding videos onto the Fordham Google Drive and YouTube. So Sean, you can take it away.
Great, thank you. This is actually very brief, but it comes back to the concept that was discussed earlier on today, which is the idea of warehousing. And anything that you do to create asynchronous content, which can be used both this upcoming semester and perhaps beyond, will ultimately save you time and effort. So we want to encourage you to use the Fordham Google Drive option or your Fordham YouTube channel, and think about those as repositories that you can place content in and use it not only this upcoming semester, but further and later beyond. We also want to encourage you to embed the links to either Google Drive or to YouTube in your Blackboard class so that you can then easily recycle that material simply by putting that link into another Blackboard class and another Blackboard class and beyond. And just one final thing, one of the great things about the Fordham University relationship with Google is that you, as a member of the Fordham community, have unlimited capacity. In other words, you can put as many videos and as much content as you would like into your Google Drive or into your Fordham YouTube channel, and we are not bouncing up against some quota that might be on your personal account. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I'm not going to click this link because yesterday when we did our run through, it was very slow to load, but you're going to get this link when you get the recording and when you get the kind of summary of our webinar in the faculty newsletter, this link goes to all these tutorials and explanations from Fordham faculty IT that explains how you can access your Fordham Google Drive, your Fordham YouTube, and upload and embed videos onto Blackboard. So that's a great repository for how to actually do the technical side of this, of these asynchronous materials. Thanks, Sean, again, for talking us through this. Oops. Okay. So you can also record a video lecture or any kind of skill that you would like students to have an understanding of through screen captures. So when I was taking through my doctoral program at GSC, the quantitative methods course, our dean, Akane Zusha, was actually my professor, and she did a screen capture of SPSS. So I was able to watch her video tutorials of SPSS and practice on my own how to input data and how to run different analytical tests. So that's just one real world example of how screen captures can be used asynchronously. So you can record whatever you want from your screen. It could be a presentation, data files, a program or software that you want students to be accustomed with. And these are tutorials that you can create with this method. Or like we said before, you could use Zoom with your share screen function and or QuickTime. That's another software you can use. So the advantages of a screen capture that you can not only do video lecture, but you can show a skill in a way that students can learn it at their own pace and practice it on their own computers. And like I said before, students can play, pause, and repeat as many times as they would like and rewatch it as many times as they would like. So Sean's going to talk about, on our next slide, one tool that you can use to do a screen capture, and that tool is called Nimbus.
Thank you, Veronica. I just want to also note a kind of a technical issue with Zoom. When you record a Zoom session, you have two options. You can record to the cloud or you can record to your local computer. It's important to know that Zoom will delete recordings after 30 days. So you have access to that cloud recording for 30 days after you have recorded it. If you want to make that recording available, for example, the semester after this or next year or something like that, please make sure that you have a copy of that recording placed in your Google Drive folder or in the Fordham YouTube channel so that you have that for posterity. Please don't assume that what you record on Zoom in the cloud will be there next year, for example. So just to come back to the idea of screen recording, there's a wonderful tool called Nimbus. It is a plugin that works within your browser. I use it personally within my Chrome browser and is a plugin there. And it will allow you to either capture the entire screen as a still image or a specific part of the screen as a still image. It will also allow you to record as you demonstrate moving the mouse around on the screen and going from slide to slide to slide, for example. And lastly, what's great about Nimbus is not only can you record either still or video images of what's occurring on your screen to save that as a recording or as an image to give your students, but you can also annotate it. You can put arrows, you can highlight things, you can circle things, you could type something on it. I think there's so many times in life where we're trying to explain to someone, you know, click here or take a look at that, and they somehow get lost on pages. So this is a wonderful way for you to direct your students' attention to specific parts of the screen or particular parts of a video. And that's basically it. I recommend you download it and install it. It's a great tool. We've used it very successfully and are very happy with it.
Do you all see how I clicked on the link? Do you see the Nimbus capture screen? You do? Okay, great. So it's really easy. You just click, which browser you're using, and then you can download that software on your computer. Okay, and it also goes
I will
through.
just, I'm sorry, I'll just interject here. I can tell that she has
Sure.
that on her computer because if you look more or less in the top right-hand corner, there's a green N with a sort of a dashed line around. That is the Nimbus screenshot plugin. So if she wanted to record anything, either still or video, she would click that and be given exactly, she's showing now, a whole host of options that you can pull from.
Yes, I remember that I had this downloaded from the previous time we did this webinar. So good observation, Sean, with the little N in the corner. Okay. All right. So we will continue. Okay. So one important thing that we wanted you to keep in mind is that whenever you're recording a lecture or some kind of skill for a tutorial, we'd really like you to consider making it responsive. And in that way, we want students to be able to react to it and digest the content that you're offering in the lecture instead of just watching it. This allows students to really kind of go deeper in thinking about the content, and that will actually feed into synchronous sessions when you want to be, discussing this content live with them. So some ways that you can have students react to or interact with the video rather than just watching it is by having pre and post questions to the video. So if you have a discussion board, you can have a pre-video question like, what are some things that you want to know, or what are some things that you hope you find out, or what are some, clarifications that you're seeking, and then a post question as well that has students reflect upon the learning that they just had. This is really a flipped classroom model, so the students are accessing the content on their own time, are thinking about the content on their own time, and then coming to you as the professor in a live session ready to do deeper work. So Sean is going to talk about a tool that you can use through Blackboard that helps you create this kind of responsive video watching.
Right. So there is a wonderful tool called VoiceThread, which has been championed by and used extensively by Steve D'Agostino in the Provost's office. VoiceThread is essentially a way for you to put up video, and that would be video of you musing on a particular topic or idea. It may be a video of a PowerPoint lecture that you have. It could be a video of a classroom situation, whatever the case may be. And the students then can comment on that video, essentially stop the video at a certain point and insert an annotation about what they see in the video, what they're thinking about this, questions that they may have about the video, and that gets inserted. And other students can add their comments or questions. And so an initial solitary video becomes a kind of conversation between you and the students asynchronously. The students are able to respond by text. They are able to respond via audio or by video. Interestingly, our experience at Fordham is the vast majority of students prefer to respond by audio rather than video or text, but your mileage may vary, and you as the instructor can decide whether or not they are allowed to respond by text or by audio or video. You can control those. VoiceThread is a very complex program, and I certainly can't go into showing it to you in depth at this moment, but it is something to consider if you would like to have video content that your students then can comment on via video themselves. The one main caveat I would add to this is VoiceThread is not particularly accessible. There are a number of issues with it because it's a very complex tool to allow video annotation of video. There is an accessible version of it, but that is a separate version than the standard VoiceThread version. It gets a little complex between the two. So if accessibility is a concern for you or for your students, VoiceThread may not be the best option, but it certainly is one that you can work around and you can get to be at least as accessible as possible. If you have any further questions about this, we have a couple of links that will give you introductions to it that Steve D'Agostino has created, and you're currently looking at the voicethread.com website, which has a lot of support information as well for you as a higher ed instructor.
Okay, and this is available right in Blackboard, right, Sean?
Correct. VoiceThread is a plugin within the Blackboard environment. So you would log into Blackboard and you would insert a voice thread, which is a video of yours, into Blackboard. Then your students would reply or annotate that video with their own comment on that video within the Blackboard environment. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
I will just say there is a question about the accessibility issues of VoiceThread. The VoiceThread interface is difficult for people who are relying on screen readers to navigate. Traditional screen readers cannot easily navigate the VoiceThread interface. As a consequence, there is something called VoiceThread Universal, which is their accessible version. And that version is a stripped down, less visually rich or cluttered, depending on your perspective, interface. And that is accessible through screen reader technology so that someone who has visual issues can navigate through that space. The question is, do I like VoiceThread Universal? I think it's unfortunate when technology has two different tracks. In my perfect world, and I think in most of our perfect world, we would have one tool with one interface that works equally well for all of our students. I appreciate that VoiceThread has made this attempt to create an accessible approach that students can use. But again, I think were VoiceThread building this from scratch now, they probably would think about accessibility issues earlier within the design process and create a more unified tool. Because ultimately, I, as an instructor, don't want to have to tell a student, you have to use this version, whereas everyone else is going to use a different version. So for me, it's an equity issue, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable with VoiceThread. The problem is it does some things technologically that almost nothing else does in the higher ed space. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. It's a great tool, it just has those issues.
Can all students just use the universal? Jane is asking in the chat.
Yes, all students could use the universal version. It's particularly ugly. You'll find yourself transported back into 1990s aesthetic, but it is, of course, possible.
Okay. So I think we're going to move on, but Jane, if you have, or anyone, if you have any questions about VoiceThread, you can, contact Sean. Steve D'Agostino is also really the expert at VoiceThread. So, there's a lot of people that you can ask if you're interested in using this particular tool in Blackboard. Okay, so we're going to continue. All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about designing asynchronous materials for assessing your student learning. So before we were talking about how you can deliver your academic content, so now we'll talk about how you can use asynchronous activities to actually assess your students' understanding of that content. So there's a lot of things that you can have students do individually on their own. So if you're interested in providing quizzes and tests, then we suggest using Google Forms. You can also do tests and assessments through Blackboard. If you choose to do Google Classroom, you can use Google Forms again, or the quizzes there in the suite. But most of our professors are using Blackboard for the fall, and you can create assigned assessments right there in Blackboard. You can also have students do text-based responses, so you can have them write up papers or reflections on Google Docs, or you can have them upload Microsoft Word or do a Blackboard discussion. And there's also a Blackboard assignment tool, and what's great about having students put their assignment straight into Blackboard is that you can grade this online and also annotate their paper in Blackboard as well. So everything is there on the same page, so to speak. You can also ask students to do video responses, and they could, it's interesting that Sean shared that most students like to do audio, so you can have them do video, or you can have them choose whether they want to do video or audio responses, and they can respond to a reflection question that you have by using, again, QuickTime or Zoom or any kind of screen recording software like Nimbus that we talked about before. You can also have students do individual presentations or even team presentations through screen share recordings. They can use Google Slides or Microsoft PowerPoint, and they can create these videos and put it into Blackboard for all students to see. And for other multimedia responses, we suggest things like Educreations or Microsoft PowerPoint, or there's a timeline where students can create these really kind of artistic and beautiful chronological timelines of the history of theories or the history of the educational system in the United States. And if you want some animations, Powtoons is also a fun place that students can use, create little cartoons. So there's a lot of ways that you can have students creatively respond to or develop their thinking about your content. There's also group work that you could have students do. So just because they're not sitting in groups in live sessions, you can have them do group work on their own time. And you can have this group work like through a Blackboard discussion, whereby you ask students not only to post something, but also to meaningfully respond to each other's posts. And the clearer you are about your expectations, the better. So if you say you have to respond to at least 2 people and you should ask a question, or you should respond in 50 to 100 words, something like that, that really gives students a clear idea of the type of engagement that they should have on discussion boards. Group work can also be done through Google Docs or any type of Google Suite software, because that allows multiple people to be editors, that allows you to look at a revision history to see who collaborated in what way. And there are also group projects that you could have students do, like role-playing, if that's something that's appropriate for your classroom, or presentations, and they could pre-record and upload these files to your course, and students can view these files before the live session, or you could even have students present what they want to present in your live sessions by having them share their own screens during synchronous activities. So as a note, we're going to be reviewing how to facilitate these live sessions and even group work in live sessions in tomorrow's webinar. And if you can't join us for tomorrow's webinar, the recording will be available in the next week. So now Sean's going to be talking about an example of a multimedia assessment that, that is recommended by him and his team, and that's called Perusal.
So Perusal is like VoiceThread. It's a plugin within our Blackboard environment, so you have access to it. What's great about that, of course, is when we have a plugin in the Blackboard environment, you don't have to create yet another account with another tool, and your students don't have to create yet another username and yet another password and forget it and all that kind of stuff. So Perusal comes out of the higher education environment. It was developed at Harvard University, and it is essentially a way to build a conversation among students about texts that you assign them to read. So if you want students to close read articles, textbook chapters, papers, whatever it is, Perusal is a fantastic way for students to engage with one another asynchronously before your class, so that two things occur. Number one, community is built. One of the most difficult issues within online education is, even though a student may have a relationship to you because you provide feedback and engage with them, it's often more difficult to create a sense of community among the class members themselves. And Perusal is an environment where students can comment on text that they read, ask questions of their peers about the text they read, answer each other's questions, respectfully, hopefully, reply to each other's comments, comment on the comment of the comment, etc. In other words, close read not only the text, but also close read each other's comments and wrestling with the meaning in the text itself. So we found this to be a great way to make sure that students come prepared to your next synchronous session, if you're having a synchronous session, and also to build community amongst one another. In general, we recommend that you upload documents and have students annotate it in advance of your class. We also recommend that you, as the instructor, not engage in that back and forth among the students. We tend to find that when instructors comment or answer questions or even pose questions within a reading, the students then pivot to the instructor as opposed to engaging with one another. It's an extremely powerful tool. I can set it up for you in any of your classes. Simply email me the CRN or course ID of the class that you would like to use it in. And in addition, IT will be having a number of training sessions in July and August, as you can imagine. A couple of them will be about Perusal in depth, which of course we don't have quite got the time to go into right now.
Thanks so much, Sean. And that in Sean's email again is going to be included in the recording of this webinar and in the follow-up newsletter. So if you didn't catch it at the beginning, you'll have that at your disposal later on. So thank you so much. I'm glad to know that IT is going to be doing some in-depth workshops about these tools. That's going to be really helpful for professors creating courses. Okay, so we're going to talk now about best practices for asynchronous assessments, and you're going to hear a lot of redundant comments from me because there are some things that we just want to emphasize and that are really important. So like we said before, clarity is key. Keep instructions clear, make grading procedures and policies clear, and the more you include in your syllabus, the better. Any types of rubrics, etc. The more information students have, the better they'll be able to approach this, all of these asynchronous assessments. We also recommend a reasonable turnaround time for grades. So a 1-week turnaround time for grading major assignments is really important. The closer the feedback you give to when the assignment was due, the better the student can actually, understand that feedback and feels closer to it. When there's more distance created, then that assignment feels so long ago that the student might not really quite understand or want to think deeply about the feedback that you give. So provide a reasonable turnaround time, and you may even want that to be reflected in your syllabus so that students don't pester you with questions about, when are we getting our grades back? I was a middle school teacher, so that was the beginning of every class that I ever entered. I walk into the classroom and did you grade our essays yet? And, the clearer you are from the get-go, the less those questions come up. So communication with your students is also important. In an online environment, they expect much more instant communication. So we recommend that you respond to student questions within 24 hours, at most within 48 hours. And that means checking your course site and email every day. So I would allocate at least 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes daily to just checking your course site, just checking and responding to emails. And that way the students know that you're really engaged and there for them and supporting them on their learning journey. And this I would also include in the syllabus too, your policy with communication and response time. Okay, so some other best practices are that you plan well and early, because creating and designing asynchronous material really takes time and effort. So if you get started now, then you're in a good place for the fall semester. And please remember that asynchronous work should be aligned with your overall course goals and with any kind of synchronous sessions that you're going to be offering. So if it's just busy work that you're asking students to do, then you could probably delete that from your syllabus. We really want assignments that scaffold their learning into achieving the overall course goal. There's a document that the GSE Online team created that could help you as a starting point for your strategy. I'm going to click on the link here, and you'll have this link accessible to you after the webinar. So let me just show you what it looks like. It's going to force you to make a copy of it so that no one tinkers with the original copy of this handout. So you're going to make a copy in your Google Drive, and this will be the title of it, but you can change it to anything you want. And this isn't something that that's mandatory for you to do, but we think that, the more organized you can be in your thinking, then the easier it'll be to strategize what you want to do for your course. So here's just a handout that will help you plan your asynchronous materials. So the instructions are in red font, so you can just delete the red and fill it in with your own information. So if you're dividing up your course into what we call modules, so let's say you have a 15-week course. Each week might be a module, or you might have several modules within 1 week, but we recommend that you do the week-by-week organization, because that might be the kind of simplest way to go about it. So you would put in your module topic here, or even the week number that's there. You would also think about some learning objectives. What do you want students to come away with during that week or during that module? And we suggest putting those learning objectives at the start of your module so that students know what they're aiming for. So at the beginning of each week, you could say, by the end of this week, you should be able to X, Y, Z, do the certain skills that you want them to do. Okay. We also highly suggest that you think about how this topic and these learning objectives connect to your overall course goal. And you could think about the reasoning there as well. Okay. So for asynchronous delivery, you can kind of use these empty boxes to think about what kinds of asynchronous assessments and assignments and lectures or video recordings you want to offer during that module. So what content do you want to cover? What learning objective does this content lead towards? In what asynchronous ways will this content be covered? So is it going to be through a reading? Is it going to be through a lecture? Is it going to be through a discussion board, or maybe a combination of those things? How long should students spend on this content? And what follow-up or reflective activity will students do to react to this content? Okay, so again, you don't have to fill these out, but these are just some questions that we want you to keep in mind as you're planning. If you scroll down, we're also asking you to think about the assessment part of the content. So what content will students be assessed on? In what ways will students be assessed on this content? What is the objective of this assessment? How will it be graded? What are the expectations? And how much time? So you're really thinking about two key things. What content am I delivering, and in what way? And how will I know that students are actually understanding and diving deeply into this content. So maybe I'm delivering my content through video lectures and through article readings, maybe even a voice thread, and I'm assessing their understanding by doing a discussion board post or by asking students to reply through audio, etc. So there's a lot of things that, as we talked about before, there's a lot of creative ways that you can go about planning your asynchronous materials. And we also highly recommend giving students options. So maybe students want to write 500 words on a topic. Maybe they want to give a brief, presentation, a 2-minute presentation on what they've learned, etc. Maybe you're asking students to plan a 10-minute synchronous discussion, and they have to work with others on leading a discussion in your live session. So there's a lot of creative activities that you can do and you can use in your asynchronous work. Okay. And when you're planning on asynchronous assessments, we also really highly suggest that you collaborate with other faculty. So talk to your colleagues. You're not in this on your own. There are a lot of colleagues that actually have online experience already, and that might know some tips and tricks and some creative projects that you might want to include in your own courses. So the more people that you talk to, I think the more informed you're going to be about the process. And we also suggest, even if you have a colleague that you work closely with or that you want to work even more closely with, to set up a weekly or bi-weekly support group with each other. Have a Zoom meeting, talk about what you've planned so far for your course, what you want to plan next. Maybe you swap syllabi or instructions for assignments to see whether those are actually clear from a student point of view. So, the more support that you build for yourself and with each other, then the easier the planning process will be. Okay, so at this time, we're going to open up the webinar for questions and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. And okay, and at this point, you can unmute yourself and you can ask Sean or myself or Rachel any questions that you have about the tools that we covered or asynchronous materials in general. The difference between synchronous and asynchronous. So this is your time to jump in.
While we're waiting for a question, perhaps I'll just shill, pardon the pun there, for a couple of things about Perusal as a tool. One thing I hadn't mentioned is Perusal has an artificial intelligence engine built into it that grades your students' annotations. So as we were talking about earlier in this presentation about trying to find strategies to save you time in terms of preparing for this coming semester and beyond, Perusal will also automatically assess your students' work in engaging with each other over the course reading. You as the instructor can, of course, completely ignore what Perusal thinks their grade is. You can tweak it if you wish, or you can accept it verbatim. It's up to you. But I just wanted to let you know that one of the time-saving strategies that's built into Perusal is an automated grading feature.
Thank you, Sean. That's really helpful. Okay. No problem, John. Thanks for being here. Okay, so I know it's important to have wait time. Go ahead.
If anybody who's already been doing a lot of this teaching, like what would be the best way to assess, sorry, I can show my face too. What would be the best way to assess, like if students are actually learning what we're intending for them to learn? So for instance, let's say in a psychopathology course that I'm teaching, I normally do quizzes within the classroom, right, for each module. And now it would be really open book. And so I'm just kind of thinking about how to best assess that they are, let's say memorizing the diagnoses that they need to know or whatever the case may be. What do you think would be the best way with online learning?
So this is really, you're asking, you want to assess students' kind of understanding of definitions of terms and things like that.
Yeah, like their comprehension of, you know, whatever I'm lecturing on or teaching on.
So, you know, in a face-to-face classroom, usually what you would do is give a quiz or a test or something like that, right? So even though it's going to be open book because there's no way to ensure that students aren't looking at information, you can give these brief assessments and through Google Forms or even in Blackboard, you can create the test itself. If you want to do quick checks at the beginning or at the end of live sessions, you can also send out a link to a Google form, have them quickly do, you know, say you have 5 minutes now to fill out this form, and you can get the answers at the afterwards, so you can see, you know, their knowledge in the moment. But I also suggest that you think about other ways besides these kind of formal evaluations. So like you can say, provide students with a case or a problem and say, how would you use XYZ method to counsel this student, or, you know, so they could do a text-based response. And it takes longer to grade. And I acknowledge that because, you know, quizzes and tests are really quick, right? So that's the advantage from the instructor's point of view of that. But if you give them written assignments, then they can maybe go deeper in their thinking and explanation of the content area that you want them to understand. You can also have them do that kind of thinking in an audio file. So let's say you give them 5 vocabulary terms or 5, you know, concepts. You can say, like, pretend that you're teaching these concepts. Record a 2-minute presentation of how you would teach these concepts. So, you know, and that also is going to take longer to grade because you would have to watch all that and have a rubric for that. But I think that was probably going to be more meaningful work for the students than this kind of, you know, traditional quiz, ABC, multiple choice type of scenario. I know there are some other instructors here on our webinar, so please feel free to jump in. Like I know, you know, Jane is here, or, you know, Kirsten, feel free to also talk to Sean and Rachel about your experiences. Sean, go ahead.
So I just add a couple of comments. One is that if you do want to do a kind of a richer response rather than a quiz, a VoiceThread could be a great tool for that, because students can also create their own VoiceThreads. So they would orally respond to, or in a video respond to, the prompt that you give them. And then their peers could comment on what they have said or presented. So you can get feedback going between the students among themselves, reviewing your material in a richer way rather than simply you know, giving them a pop quiz or something like that. So VoiceThread can be used not only for instructor giving content and then getting student feedback, but it can also be student to student feedback as well. And the second thing I would say is I would urge you never to use a Google form for a quiz. I would urge you to use the quiz feature within, or the testing feature within Blackboard. And the reason is, when you set up a test within Blackboard, you can also set up automatic grading so that your students can be scored, assuming there's no written content. Okay, this is assuming you didn't plop you know, an essay question at the end. But if it's simply a true, false, yes, no, black, white, A, B, C, or D, etc., if you structure it in that way, quizzes within the Blackboard environment are automatically scored by Blackboard, and that grade is then transferred to what is called the grade center within Blackboard. So again, reducing the amount of kind of work that you would need to do, the busy work of grading a quiz. Whereas were you to get that from Google Forms, you would then have to collect all those forms, you know, assign a grade, insert it into the grade center, etc. So please always use Blackboard grading, pardon me, Blackboard test feature if you're giving a simplistic quiz.
That's
I
an
also
excellent
have,
point. Thank you, Sean. Mhm.
I can also comment on that. So I think regardless it's online format or face-to-face format, I think the assessment method, the way of assessing some certain objectives or learning goal, I think you should figure out what's the best way. And if you already figured it out that it's testing or quiz is the best way to do that, then I think you should think about what's the best way to have the test or quiz online. So like Sean explained, I think it's pretty doable doing it in the Blackboard. And I have a question to Sean because we are from IT. So it was actually discussed and mentioned a couple of times before, proctoring service. Like when we have very serious exam or test or quiz, then is it possible to have a proctoring service, or is there some kind of feature like that from Blackboard?
So the answer is maybe and no. This is an extremely difficult issue, and it's difficult technologically, and it's extremely fraught in terms of kind of an ethical or moral perspective. And there are very strong and passionate views about proctoring and invasions of privacy and distrust of students, honesty, and all those kinds of things, which I'm sure you're aware of and know. What I would say is this: the provost's office, because of the request that faculty made last semester at the end of the spring semester for some proctoring tool, the provost's office was investigating various options. I don't actually recall where they ended up or what they have done, but the thing to do would be to reach out to the office and see if they have come up with something. But it's one of those things where if we can encourage you as faculty members to think about better ways to get qualitative responses from students rather than being in a more facile kind of qualitative, potentially cheatable exam, we really encourage that because the issues regarding proctoring are just very, very complex and ultimately never 100% secure.
Okay, all right, thank you.
One other tool that I like to use, and it's not assessment if you need to track grades or specific responses necessarily, but the Zoom polling that we did at the beginning of this session can be a great way to kind of take the temperature of a class before you start it, particularly if you're just looking for like, what do you think the best definition of X is? Or like, what was the main point of the reading? It can just give you a sense going into a synchronous session, like the percentage of people who got the main idea. It's not gonna necessarily help you with grading assessment, but it's a nice way to kind of let yourself know what people understood, and students might answer it honestly because it can be anonymous. So you'll get a kind of good response that way, I think.
That's a good
Right, and
point,
then-
Kirsten. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
and
bringing
also
that
the
up.
polling. Yeah, polling. I learned that recently that you can, if it's not anonymous, you can actually download the answers and then as a record and then look at it. Yeah. And polling and whiteboard and everything, you can save it. Yeah.
So Angelica, to answer your question in the chat, I don't know if you're on our list to get our newsletters every week. Our online team sends out these course continuity newsletters. So I'm going to forward yesterday's to you, and that's where you will find the webinar link from last week. And you'll also find our course continuity website, and there's a lot of resources there. And I'll point you out to, there's this one teacher channel run by Russell Stannard, and he has excellent videos about lots of tech tools like Google Drive, but especially Zoom. I've actually learned some things about Zoom through his channel, so I'm going to include that link as well. So I'm just writing a note to myself to send you the newsletter and the Russell Standard website. And also, just so you know, we have individual appointment times, so you can always log on to our calendar and set up an appointment with us. It'll either be Rachel or myself, or sometimes it'll be both if we don't have another meeting to get to. And you can ask us any types of questions that you have, and it could be even about the way that you're assessing students' understanding in your class. Okay. Are there any other questions?
I have one more question to Sean because Sean, our IT guru, is there. So you mentioned that our cloud recording is saved only for a month, which might affect some of our faculty's recordings from their courses. So then I think we should announce. We should remind our faculty that they should download their recordings because we have been suggesting, recommended that they should use cloud to share the recordings because the recordings can be accessible and with photo transcript and chat saved and everything, and it's easy to share. So then I think we have to also remind them that they have to download it and let them know how to make it available through either Google Drive and YouTube. So YouTube, I think it takes a little time, learning time for faculty because they have to know how to download, upload it, and to make it accessible, they also have to figure out how to put the captions there or correct the captions. For the Google Drive, I think it's much easier because they can just put it there. But without doing some advanced work, there is no closed caption, and it's not meeting the universal design standard. So, do you have any suggestion, or is there a guide to help that situation?
No, you've laid it out perfectly, Rachel. You've really described exactly the contradiction. YouTube is better because of the transcription. It is more complex to get in. It's not a particularly intuitive thing for an instructor working in this way. And as we know, even the Fordham YouTube channel is littered with ads and crap on the screen, whereas when you share a video within your Google Drive, it's a much cleaner experience. The best or the most perfect way, perhaps, would be to get a recording with embedded captioning and then save that as a file within your Google Drive so that it just automatically comes up. But that's—
How can you do that?
Again, again, you would need to do a screencast of the caption. You know what I mean? It just starts to get really
right. Okay.
But because you're using multiple tools and whatnot. So you're exactly correct. There's a paradox because the easy thing is not accessible and the more complex thing is, but it's difficult to do.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you. But so at least I think our faculty should be aware that the pros and cons of using YouTube or Google Doc and the link to the cloud, direct link to the cloud recordings. Okay.
Right, and just the key thing is to not think about Zoom as being a long-term repository for your sessions. That's just absolutely crucial because Zoom has never seen itself as a file storage system. They've seen themselves as a synchronous environment. And when we use their recording, it's an asynchronous use of their tool, but that's not what they're designed or kind of aiming to do. You can imagine how many Zooms have been conducted in the last couple of months, and if they stored everything that was done, I'm sure they would just explode or something.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sean and Rachel. Those are some really important points to keep in mind, so I appreciate that. Is there anyone else who wants to chime in?
May I ask a question?
Okay.
Sure.
Of course.
Kristen, I want to ask you a question. Can you tell us more about the library and how you've had to adapt or adopt in this crisis to making material available to GSE classes and faculty? Is there anything that we should be aware of that's been going on behind the scenes?
Yes, thanks so much for asking, Sean. So we know that you all miss everything in the print collection. We do too. All the books you had on reserve, all the DVDs that you're used to using. So we are kind of on an ordering spree right now where anything that you need that we own in print form, we're trying to find in electronic form, be it ebook, streaming video, or access to a specific journal that you need for your research or teaching. So I guess the most important thing to note is that anything you need, just ask us for, and we will try to get for you. You're not going to kind of give us a duplicate order. If it's something that we own in print only, we have to kind of submit an order again to ask for it in a different format. So any of, again, the books that you are used to using for your class or used to having available for your students, we need to see if we can get electronically, because that's growing our collection in the electronic resources world has been a goal of ours for several years, and the current situation has just kind of ramped up our collecting practices. So I'm going to actually find the order a book form and share that in the chat, and that's the best way to ask us to purchase the resources that you might need. So that's like, I think the biggest change is just people used to using their textbooks in print are now trying to get electronic versions of them.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Kirsten.
Kirsten.
I think that's going to be.
Yeah, I was going to also mention that thank you, Kirsten, and thank you, Sean, for asking Kirsten for that. At the GSD also, last year, Kirsten helped us creating syllabus template for the CNT department, but this time for the course continuity, our Dean's office also updated the syllabus, made it into the GSE general course syllabus template so that we can, all our faculty and adjunct can use that syllabus. And in that template, of course, we included Kirsten's contact information for anything, any questions getting the textbook or resources, anything, they can directly contact Kirsten. So thank you, Kirsten, for that.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yes, and I hope our faculty is contacting you more.
And we can share this link with our faculty in our newsletter, Kirsten, the one that you sent.
Yes, that would be great. And that's, again, for requesting anything, anything new for our collection or anything that exists only in print that you now need electronically.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions or comments, then we're going to close up the webinar. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So here are just some closing thoughts. So in summary, creating asynchronous materials takes time and effort, but it is worthwhile as carefully planned asynchronous work increases the quality of the overall course and student satisfaction as well. And those are important things, especially for you as professors who rely on course evaluations. So next steps are tomorrow is our third webinar in the 3-part series. It's at the same time from 10:30 to 12 p.m. And we're going to be talking about how to successfully deliver online courses, including facilitating live sessions from the beginning of the semester to the end. So if you can't make it at the same time tomorrow, then we will make the recording available to you. Next week, we will also send a recording of this webinar because we only have tomorrow and Zoom takes a long time to process recordings. So Thursday, Friday is off for the July 4th holiday. So we will get this out probably on Monday to all of you. Okay, so thank you so much for everybody here, and really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Sean and Kirsten and Rachel, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.